It is the Universal Day of Love. So, what better time to talk about a few of the romance novels that have influenced me in probably the last 40 years? I'm just about to turn an age that I don't want to think about, so here I am, recording to distract myself from my imminent birthday. Hey everyone, it's Ray and welcome to my little bookish corner of the world. I will soon be changing locations, not because I'm moving, but as I've mentioned previously, I am waiting for a new piece of furniture to make a really cozy little reading corner in my incredibly large living room. And I'm not saying that to boast, I'm saying that because it's looking incredibly empty right now. So I figured today would be the perfect time to talk about all the books, or at least some of the books, that have influenced my long dive into romance novels. I have to be honest, none of these are really new. I think probably the most recent one is around 2021. So, yeah, that none of them are new, but I think they are all worth reading for one reason of another. So, I'm going to get started with the first one, and that is The Changeover by Margaret May. Yeah, this doesn't sound particularly romantic, but there is an underlying romance story between Sorensen Carlyle and Laura Chant, but it's also more about love in general, love of family, of friends, of potential. And I think that's what I enjoyed the most about this. I know I have talked about this book incessantly, and I'm not going to apologize for it. It is a book I honestly would recommend. Yes, it is YA, and yes, it is very thin, but it was written in the early to mid 80s, which is not when I got this copy. I do have one that is much older than this. I've had several because they keep on falling apart as I reread it regularly. And the story is one that I really enjoy. I think it was probably, to my mind at least, the origin of what we would now term supernatural romance for the YA age. So things like Twilight were, in my mind, there because of books like The Changeover. Sadly, Margaret May has passed away, and she probably was turning in her grave when she saw the absolute debacle that was the film of this book. And if you want to find out what the book is about, do not watch the film. It is nothing like the book at all. There's earthquakes, there's dark, mystical magic, and it's made incredibly depressing in personal view. That's not what this book is. This book is hope. Yes, there is darkness in it, but it is more about the hope and the freedom and the wonderful love between Laura, her mum, her younger brother, and eventually a rather, at times, odd and unusual Sorensen Carlyle. So that's my first book. And this was probably the book that influenced me the most in the direction my reading took for a considerable period in my tweens and early teens. That and Flowers in the Attic, but we are not going to go there. The next one is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. I absolutely love this book. I've reread it multiple times in the last probably 12 months. I think I've read it twice, if not three times. It's again quite a short novel, but it is so beautifully written, and the way that it evokes the stunning scenery of Italy is just incredible. George and Lucy are a wonderful couple, even though it takes them a very long time to get where they need to be. And every time I read it, I just get little palpitations. That sounds really bad, but I have this wonderful warm glow because their story is just so sweet, I think is probably the best way to put it. Is there a lot of stuff that's kind of unbearable in it? Yes. Her fiance is horrific. And well, not he's not horrific, he's just not the kind of person you could see her with after having seen her interactions with George in Italy. And then, yeah, I don't think I need to tell you the story, and I'm not going to give you the rundown and spoilers for this book. If you haven't read it, do read it. It is, in my view, the best of Forster. I have read all his other stuff, including Passage to India and Where Angels Fear to Tread and Maurice, all very good books, but this one remains my all-time favorite, and the film is incredible. I wouldn't say the TV series is as good. It ends on a very different note. The film that they made of this, that won Oscar nominations and actually won some Oscar recognition and BAFTA recognition for that matter, is far better. So definitely pick this up, read the book, watch the film, and you will not regret it. I promise you. It is a classic, beautiful love story. Very, very gentle. Next one isn't exactly the next book that I read, because now I'm not going in any order at all, but this is On a Night Like This by Lindsay Kelk. It's the book that actually introduced me to Kelk's writing. I have got quite a few of her others, including The Christmas Wish, which is a very amusing, romantic take on on Groundhog Day in many ways. Has people there's a gas explosion which obviously kills everyone and resets the timeline again, but that's not that one. This is On a Night Like This, which is the story of Fran Cooper, who gets a job on an exclusive yacht that is being she's looking after a diva called Juliet. They go to this crystal ball around New Year, just before Christmas, and she is abandoned on the island where the ball is taking place, and she meets Evan Carden, who is meant to be there. He belongs there. As it says on the back of the book, Evan belongs at the ball and Fran is a gatecrasher. So Evan is of a member of high society, or American high society. His family has money. He is well known as a party playboy, and over the course of time, their story intertwines and they fall in love. But she is not meant to be there, so there's a lot of rather, it's almost Monte Carlo-esque, you know, the film with Selena Gomez and I believe Leighton Meester. It's very, very similar to that in tone of, you're not meant to be here, but you are pretending to be someone you're not. And that's the tone I always get when I read this. It's a fun, light-hearted, but also quite intriguing and deep look into Fran's character and how she becomes the person she is. It has several sort of tones of Me Before You, in the fact that she has got a disastrous relationship at home with her boyfriend Stu, and it's going nowhere, and she knows it's going nowhere, but she can't seem to bring herself to end it. But yeah, so that's On a Night Like This. It's another one I would recommend. If you could go anywhere is probably one of my favorites. It's not my all-time favorite. We will be coming to that shortly, but this is my favorite page turn. If You Could Go Anywhere is the story of Angie, who on her mother died when she was 3 days old. She was brought up by her grandparents in a town called Coober Pedy in Australia. She's never been anywhere, but every time somebody comes to the town, somebody new, she asks them the question if you could go anywhere, because she lives vicariously through their travels and their experiences. When her grandmother sadly passes away, she's had Alzheimer's, and Angie has been nursing her for a long time. Angie discovers that not only is her father alive, but her grandparents always knew where he was and never ever communicated with him that he had a daughter. So she reaches out to him. His name is Julio Marchesi. He lives in Rome. And she reaches out to him, goes to Italy to meet him. And this is where she also almost also meets his stepson Alessandro, who has a lot of demons of his own. He's coping with the sad death of his younger sister. His mother had certain mental illnesses, and it made his childhood quite difficult. And it is the story of how Angie learns to cope with the fact that not only did her grandmother keep her from her father, but she's also learning who she is, because she never had the chance, even though she's 27, of leaving the town where she was born. She was trapped there because of her own duty to her family. And when she discovers that they had been lying to her for her entire life, she feels betrayed. But as is her nature, she doesn't really lash out, mostly because there's no one to lash out to. So that's If You Could Go Anywhere by Paige Toon. It is my favourite by her, by sort of bar none. It is my all time favourite. The next one is going right back to the 80s, and that is Gentle Rogue by Joanna Lindsey. This is the third book, I believe, in the Mallory series, and it is the story of Georgina Anderson and James Mallory, who is one of the older brothers. He is an ex-pirate, and Georgie is the only daughter in the Anderson family. They are a family of shipping magnates out of America, and she goes to England to find her fiance, who disappeared and was captured on during a battle at sea. So she knows he's in England. She goes looking for him and discovers that not only had he forgotten her, he has married and he has children. So she decides to smuggle back to America on a ship and disguises herself as a boy. Of course, that ship just happens to be James Mallory's. He is a world-renowned pirate. Her brothers absolutely loathe him. And on this journey back to America, James kind of seduces, well, not even kind of, he does seduce Georgina, who was under the misapprehension that she had fooled him into thinking she was a boy at some point, and then questioned his proclivities, because we are talking about, this was in the early 1800s, and she was very, very horrified at the fact that he was making advances towards her. And then she is even more horrified when she realizes he knew she was a girl all along. Of course, things don't work out exactly as as Georgina wants them to, and is forced into marrying him. But yeah, it's a Fabio cover, if you couldn't tell, and this is my original copy of the book when it came out. I have not, I've got an entire shelf of Joanna Lindsey, and I have every single one of the Mallorys. Actually, I have got every single book she ever wrote. So yeah, it is a rather suggestive cover, and that is probably why they get the name Bodice Rippers. But that is Gentle Rogue, and I keep them more out of loyalty, and they are my New Year's Eve reading. Every single New Year's Eve, I read a Joanna Lindsey novel, and it doesn't matter which one. I just pick one randomly off the shelf. It doesn't matter if it's halfway through a series, the beginning, the end, it doesn't matter. I just read one. To the Moon and Back is probably my all-time favourite of modern women's lit, or what was known as chick lit. This book I have got as paperback, as you can see, and it looks like it hasn't been read, but it has. I also have it as a Kindle copy, and I also have the audio book, but I struggle with audio, so it's there just in case. It is a book I encouraged my niece to read, and she did read it, which was fantastic because she isn't a very keen reader. And this book broke my heart, and still breaks my heart every single time I read it. It is the story of Ellie and Zach, but it starts with the story of Ellie and Jamie, or rather, Ellie when Jamie dies. Ellie and Jamie are a young couple. They've been married for a while. They've been in love for even longer. And when Jamie goes out with his friend Todd for the evening to a reunion, they end up in a car accident. And while Todd walks away with minimal injuries, Jamie unfortunately does not. Ellie suffers in her home for a while. She still has conversations with Jamie, and those are the bits that actually break my heart the most. She has conversations with Jamie, but they live in a property that is incredibly downtrodden. It is poorly kept by the landlords, and the neighbors are they're actually quite terrifying when you read all the things they're doing. There are knife issues. It's kept really badly by not only the tenants but also the landlord. And her father-in-law is Tony Weston, a very well known and famous and wealthy actor in America. He comes over, sees how Ellie is living, and buys her a flat in a very exclusive area of London, and tells her that he's buying it for himself, but it would be good if she was there, if she lived there while he is traveling and doing his films. At the same time, Zach is looking for an assistant. Zach McLaren, he is looking for an assistant, and he spies Ellie, is absolutely fascinated with her, and then sees her with Tony, assuming immediately that Tony is her lover, thinking that she is his mistress, and they are engaged in a torrid affair, which actually upsets him because he is immediately enamored of her and can't stop thinking about her. And then one day she walks into his office asking for a job. She's been working somewhere else, and her existing boss thought she was an easy target because she was a widow, and made passes at her. So she decides to leave her job, and she obviously can't. She's not the kind of person that could sit around and do nothing. So she goes searching for another job, hears about the job at Zach's office, originally applies and is unsuccessful, and then the the person he decides to employ leaves. So he hires Ellie. Things go really well. Zach is still he's dating somebody called Louisa, but he is still thinking about Ellie a lot. Ellie dates a number of people, including somebody who comes to Zach for financing because he's a financier. She dates this man called Joe, who has created this character, and he's written a screenplay. She dates Todd very briefly, which always felt very odd to me, but I think that there was a connection between her and Todd because of their joint love of Jamie and the memories that they share. But it was never going to work because there's guilt there automatically. And then things take a turn, and of course, you know where it's going. It's a story you wouldn't mention Zach and Ellie in the same breath without knowing that something's going to happen. But I'm not going to tell you everything because you need to read it. It's a beautiful story. It is, if you are somebody like me who will cry at the drop of a hat when it comes to something sad on paper, you will cry at this book. I promise you, you will cry at this book. It is what I will term a cry book, very much like if you if you could go anywhere. They are both cry books, but this one gets me every single time because Ellie and the way that she talks with Jamie, even though he's gone, I just well up every single time. There are two books left to go on my list of what I consider the ultimate romance novels, and as I've said, none of them are have come out in the last few years. So the next one is Rosie Hopkins' Sweet Shop of Dreams by Jenny Colgan. I have read a lot of her books. In fact, I think the first book I read by her was Do You Remember the First Time? But obviously, I also have Amanda's Wedding, Looking for Andrew McCarthy, and The Good, the Bad, and the Dumped, plus Operation Sunshine and a few others. I have the older books by Jenny Colgan. I have read her newer ones like Close Knit and Summer Skies, but this one remains one of my favourites. It is the first in a series, and it is probably the first one that inspired a series by her. It is the story of Rosie, who goes to help her great aunt Lillian run Lipton's sweet shop, which she has been running for decades. She has a boyfriend called Gerard, and he is not so interested in that side of her life. He's not interested in being a part of her family or getting involved in anything that she wants to do. She has a specific life set out for her, and it's not necessarily one she's interested in. So she heads to help her aunt, who has had a fall and she's been in hospital. She's not very well. She's obviously quite elderly, and Lillian starts telling her the story of her life and of her Henry. While Rosie is there, she meets this absolutely cute child called Edison, who is probably wise beyond his years, and she builds a bond with him and his mother, mostly him, as he comes into the shop every day. And she also meets Stephen, who is obviously going to be the love interest in this. There's no disguising it. Gerard is so far so far off the pitch when it comes to this. And this is more a story of Rosie getting to know her aunt, but also getting to know herself, which I think is a theme with a lot of these particular books. It is not so much about, oh, I've fallen in love, I found the most perfect man. It is also about, I've fallen in love with myself. I know who I am and I know what I want. And I think that's a powerful message that all of these books send, especially If You Could Go Anywhere, To the Moon and Back, and Rosie Hopkins' Sweet Shop of Dreams. They aren't so much a classic love story like Gentle Rogue. They are a story of learning to love yourself, which is why my last choice is going to feel completely out of out of field when it comes to these particular books. But it is another historical romance, and it is Ransom by Julie Garwood. This was actually one of the last historical novels that Julie Garwood wrote before she moved into writing thrillers or romantic thrillers. It just proves there are so many different genres of romance, because we have Julie Garwood writing romantic thrillers. Sadly, she passed away in 2023, so there will be no more books from her. I really would have loved another book in the Highlands, because that's what this is. This is a book based in the Highlands, and personally, I think that's what Garwood did best. Again, my personal feeling. This is the story of Gillian and Brodick, and if you are at all familiar with Julie Garwood's work, you may have read The Secret, which is the first book in this series, and it reintroduces Brodick and Ramsay, who are two chiefs of clans in the Highlands. And Gillian is a young woman who is placed in an untenable situation. When she was very young, she witnessed her father getting murdered by the man who ends up taking his holdings and keeping her a prisoner in his home. She escapes from this when she's a young woman with a young child that the Baron had kidnapped, who ends up being the child of a Scottish chieftain, who is less than impressed that his son's been kidnapped, obviously, but very impressed by the fact that this young woman brings him his son. Obviously, at that point, Brodick comes into the game. He is the one who meets her when she is bringing the child back to Scotland, to assess whether she is actually who she says she is, but also to see if she has got the best interests of the child at heart, or if she's tricking him, because the Scottish did not trust the English, understandably, really. And she's also looking for her sister, who escaped at the time her father was killed. Her sister was taken away by some of the household staff while she was kept prisoner. It wasn't intentionally that way, but it just happens that unfortunately Gillian fell when they were escaping the castle, and she was then kept. Unfortunately, she was unable to escape. But the Baron is looking desperately for this box of jewels that were taken, that her father was accused of taking. That's why he stayed at the castle. Unfortunately, they are nowhere to be found, and he believes Gillian can find them. He believes that her sister took them, and therefore Gillian can find her sister and find the jewels. What happens from then on is a lot of intrigue, and that's one of the things. It made a lot of sense to me when Julie Garwood turned to writing thrillers because there's always a mystery in these books. It's never a case of straightforward, oh, close proximity or mistaken identity. There is always a mystery to be solved in these books, and that is why I really enjoy Garwood's work. And I recently reread The Bride as part of my February book club. So, yeah. But those are my choices. Do you have any of these? Have you picked them up, looked at them, and thought, not really in the frame of mind, or no, that doesn't really sound like something I'd like to read? I honestly would recommend every single book that I've picked up and told you about here. I'm just going to pick them up and, just for the sake of it, go through them all again. I honestly think that if you're going to pick up any of them, it depends on what you like. If you like something with a bit of mystery and a bit of history, then that was a rhyme. Then I'd say Ransom. It's one of my favorites. A Room with a View, you cannot go wrong. The Changeover, if you like something a little bit more fantasy, witchcraft and mystery and bad succubi, then The Changeover is definitely one to go. If you like something that is almost Monte Carlo-esque, On a Night Like This, Page Toon, and Jill Mansell if you want a massive cry. And if you just want something that's nothing but open door smut, then I'd say Gentle Rogue is probably your way to go. So there are my recommendations for romance on this day of romance. And if you, like me, are going to be sitting down watching episodes of Modern Family this evening and enjoying a glass of wine on your own, then happy Valentine's Day anyway. Bye.